I want to welcome you to our fun-filled afternoon discussing Islamic law in America, how the Obama administration, Department of Justice, is selling out the American people. It's interesting to me that this is the only event at CPAC addressing this crucial issue. The fact that they are not addressing it, we are independent, AFDI and SIA are putting this event on. As you can see with great difficulty, I see the sweating faces, the panting, and the pushing and the shoving, the standing room only, which tells you the keen interest there is in this issue. Not only did American law for American courts, the foreign law prohibition, pass in 3 states, and Robert Muise will discuss that in detail, but it's being proposed in 25 other states. People care about this. Now the people will say, but there's no such thing as Islamic law in America. There's no Sharia in America. We're protected by the First Amendment. And I am telling you that it is creeping. The mosquing of the workplace, imposing Muslim prayer times on union contracts. The Heinz Company, who is enormously generous to their Muslim workers, they have prayer rugs, they have prayer rooms, is now being sued to stop the line. Stop the line for Muslim prayer times. Now, they don't do this in Muslim countries that live under the Sharia. They pray before, they pray afterwards. So why do it here? Because it is a way of imposing Islam on the secular marketplace. And many Muslims that come to this country come here to escape the Sharia, not to bring the Sharia. And it's interesting to me that the voices that we hear are all Islamic supremacist voices. And this is not a partisan issue. Because this morning you had Suhail Khan completely whitewashing Sharia, giving out these leave-behinds, why Jews can't criticize Sharia law. What do the Jews have to do with this? First of all, there's no compulsion in Jewish law. There is no compulsion in canon law. It's voluntary. The Sharia is a comprehensive political system governing every aspect of human life that asserts authority over non-Muslims. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is why you see in Muslim countries living under the Sharia the oppression, subjugation, persecution, and slaughter of Christians in Egypt. It's happening in Thailand, in Indonesia. So what I want to do here is show you how speech is being silenced and being censored. Suhail Khan giving this away to the uninitiated, and when someone queried him and said, you know, read Robert Spencer's books, scholar on Islam, 10 books, Suhail Khan, whose best bud is Alan Moody serving a life sentence for being an Al-Qaeda the number 1 Al-Qaeda financer in America, but he was a moderate Muslim voice in the 90s before he went to jail, said Robert Spencer doesn't know what he's talking about. That's why Robert Spencer is not asked to speak, and Robert Spencer is not included in our inclusion panels. No, that was the name of the panel. Inclusion. Conservative inclusion. So the mosquing of the workplace, the mosquing of the schools, introducing these whitewashed Islamic curriculums, taking the children to mosque, Sharia finance, where your taxpayer dollars are being used to fund Sharia finance. Now you can say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, Sharia finance has to be halal. And what does that mean? It means they cannot invest in pork, in alcohol, in tobacco, and some forms of entertainment. Those are whole American sectors. You want your taxpayer dollars going to starve and bankrupt whole American sectors? And 2.5% of it has to go to zakat, which we know funds jihad. So we have to talk about this. I've assembled for you a stellar, if I may say so myself. Yes. A stellar panel who can address this from all different points on the prism. My first speaker is Arario Pantano. Arario is a war hero. He's running for Congress in North Carolina. He has been in the belly of the beast, and he has courage. He has political will. When they come after him for having anything to do with me, he does not pretend he doesn't know me. which people do, and by the way, I understand, because the attacks on me, the libelous defamation, destroying my reputation, withering attacks, scare people. Doesn't scare me. Bring it on. I'm as clean as your whistle. You have to do the work for freedom. You have to do the work. Freedom is not free, and you cannot assume your freedom, and you cannot live on the fumes of World War II and the America of the 20th century. You have to fight this war. This war is here. I want to get everybody in. It's very important. So we're going to sweat. I think Grover Norquist put the heat on in here. Arario Pantano.
That was actually me. I requested they turn the heat up so you all would know what it feels like in Iraq. We're going to come back tomorrow when it's about 120 degrees. Is that okay? Friends, it's a real honor to be with so many of you, and I can say, friends, a lot of you have been in this fight for some time now, and I think that in 2010, after a lot of hard work for a couple of years, a lot of us could agree that we got some hope. And in 2012, God willing, we're going to get the change. So continue to work, continue to activate. I am going to talk to you a little bit today about some of the foundational underpinning of this argument. It's the conversation about Sharia and its viability in the United States vis-a-vis the U.S. Constitution, the underpinnings and the foundings of this nation, where we come from, who we are as a people, and how we reconcile these different belief systems going into the 21st century. That's going to be something that's going to be a hot button for a long time. Before I get into too much detail and into the weeds, because frankly we have speakers that are much more capable than I in giving you the descriptions and the statistics and the correct pronunciations, I do want to take a little bit of time to tell you how it is that I got here. Pamela incorrectly addressed me as a war hero. I'm not that. But I have been a soldier in a couple of wars, because I do think that this country is worth fighting for, and if need be, it's worth dying for. And I don't say that lightly. I'm very young men, and I have every weight that you can imagine of the cost and the consequence of that. I want to tell you a little bit about the things that I believe our sons and daughters fight for and why they do it. And I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience, because when Pamela talks about the concern of reprisal, the concern of demonization by a media intent to destroy not only conservative values, but conservative opinions, conservative voices, and conservative stalwarts, I have a little bit of experience with that. Had any of you heard of me before I ran for Congress? Some of you had, right? The Marine with the good haircut back there. That's because we're so close to Quantico. Friends, I was charged with murder for killing terrorists in Iraq. And I give you that story because I know firsthand a little bit about what political correctness run amok does. I know what it does to impede our capabilities. I know what it does to hurt our war fighters. Some of you might be familiar with a story that's been playing out recently in the media with Marines being demonized for an unfortunate incident, when the reality is that dozens of innocent men, women, and children, and let me focus on children as the father of a 7- and 9-year-old, are being blown to pieces every single day. But the outrage has been focused on an anomaly instead of focusing it where it belongs, on an institutional practice of jihad. So we need to focus on the meat and not on the peas. So I'm going to be a little bit of the warm-up for the conversation. And Robert's laughing at me because Robert remembers when we met a couple of years ago, and we were sitting at a table, and my wife and I were there, and I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm in the anti-jihad business. And of course, you know, he runs Jihad Watch, and that's a wonderful resource and website. And I hope, if you didn't know that, I hope that you go through it. If you're watching on the web, I hope that you go through it. And my wife kind of looked at me, and my Marine Corps pin. I said, well, I'm in the anti-jihad business too. I'm just in the business end of the anti-jihad business, And friends, I'll tell you that my walk. And I come to you today not as an expert in political Islam, not as an expert in our founding. I come to you today as a witness. And I need to qualify this by saying I'm a Christian that was born again in Christ. And I give you that qualifier because I clearly bring with me a value set and a belief system that is specific. But I also want to give you that because I share, I believe, a number of the ideas, and I carry an ideology that was also represented at the time of our founding. And I want to talk a little bit openly and honestly about that, how that's informed who we are today, and how that's going to inform where we go. God works in mysterious ways. Just before, literally just before I walked in here, I received a phone call from a dear friend of mine, a gentleman named Jack Singlaw. So that name might be familiar to some of you. He had a run-in with the precursor to President Obama, a man named Jimmy Carter. And he was fired in 1977 by President Jimmy Carter because he told the president, if you move troops out of Korea, you're going to bring us to a war on the peninsula, and it'd be a foolish thing to do. And the president called him to the White House and said, you better not talk about this publicly again. And the next day, the general was out there decrying the foolishness of a naive commander-in-chief. The same man who, by the way, 2 years later would be shocked when the Soviets invade Afghanistan, when our American embassy in Pakistan would be bombed, or when we would have Americans taken hostage in Iran, which would precipitate, of course, not the Iranian hostage crisis, because they weren't Iranians, but the Americans taken hostage in Iran crisis that we know so well, and that comes from inept and from weak leadership. I give you that because when the phone rang, frankly, I was concerned. The general, listen, he jumped into France in 1944 with the OSS. He's been around a while. I was concerned when the phone rang, and I was glad to hear his voice when he picked up. And I said, sir, I'm actually carrying a book that you gave me that was written in 1989 and that is as relevant today as when we were talking a couple of years ago, and it's the book about legal terrorism. Do you remember it? And he said, Arario, I do. And I said, well, sir, can you share with me some thoughts about what the Justice Department is doing today and how that bears similarities to experiences that you had in the 80s when you and other members of various covert activities and various intelligence gathering activities would face not just scrutiny, but outright prosecution from the ACLU, but more importantly, from private organizations funded with suspicious sources of money, making a deliberate effort to attack conservatives, conservative operatives, and their efforts in a term that in 1989 was coined legal terrorism. This might not be the origin of the term. We'll have some speaking to this in a bit. But the general and I first became acquainted back in 2009, and this story matters as well as we come full circle and talk a little bit about this Justice Department. You see, the general and I became acquainted when Barack Obama, in a determination to placate a liberal base, unleashed his Attorney General Eric Holder on officers of the Central Intelligence Agency, and thus began the process of investigation with a goal of prosecution of our intelligence officers back in 2009. Does everyone remember that? Yes. 7 directors of Central Intelligence wrote a letter to the president saying, sir, don't do this. It's a mistake. It's a disaster. Our enemies won't trust us. Pardon me, our enemies, they're looking for the opportunity. Our friends won't trust us, and in this administration, sometimes that's synonymous. Our friends won't trust us, our enemies will be emboldened, and our officers will be weakened. And yet, the letter went in the G file, the prosecution continued. I got involved. I was, at the time, working on a master's degree in national security policy. I was studying with some men and some women that had been involved in the Reagan administration that were part of the Cold War fight, and General Singlaw was one of those figures. I reached out to the general. I asked for some of his assistance. We reached out to some other folks to get involved. One man was a man named Johnny Spann, father of Mike Spann, the first American killed in Afghanistan in the War on Terror on November 25th, 2001. Mike Spann got involved. Other retired intelligence officers got involved. Why? Because they needed someone to advocate for them in a 24/7 media environment that is predominantly, I won't even say dominated, shaded, colored, painted by the left, with an agenda that very clearly is trying to undermine the arguments of the right. Thank you for joining us, by the way. This is our key speaker, and he's got a lot to say. He's going to talk directly about the Justice Department here in a little bit. We started this effort, this grassroots effort, called Stand With Intelligence, in an effort to bring attention to what the Justice Department was doing and to speak for folks that could not speak for themselves, specifically intelligence officers. Later, you would recall Attorney General Holder wanting to bring Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to federal prison to try him in federal court in New York City. Does everyone remember the protests in December? Maybe I met some of you all in the rain that day in December in 2009. Friends, I'm giving you that story because I'm not standing here as a political opportunist that sees a hot issue and says, let me jump on that. Because frankly, these days it's more of a political grenade, and when you jump on it, people are afraid of being immolated. Well, I'm not. I'm not. I come at you as somebody that was an activist before he ever sought to be a representative, and somebody that, regardless of the consequences or of the success of a political run, will continue to be an activist because I fight for the things that I believe in. And I'm hoping that I can exhort all of you to join that fight in some way. And of course, if you're here, you probably already are. But I'm going to give you some reference materials, and I'm doing the best I can to hold them from slipping. So I might start moving some of it. I might even take a little bit of the real estate right here. Well, I mentioned to you this book, Legal Terrorism. This is a book that General Singlov gave to me, and I gave you that long way around so that you understand I don't arrive at this conversation as somebody that looked at it quickly. I've kind of been in the trenches of this for a bit. General Singlov experienced something in the 80s which is very much alive and well today. We'll have a conversation about that. But when we look at books today, Lawfare, The War Against Free Speech, it's ironic to think that one of my friends, somebody who probably is eminently more qualified to be speaking to all of these issues than I, is not even allowed or invited to speak here today. I salute you for calling out connections, for pointing out the networks, and frankly, I also recognize that in doing this at CPAC, I do it at my peril. But we've heard a president say this before, and I'm not afraid to say it myself. Bring it on. Bring it on. So, friends, speaking of which, and we're going to get into a little bit of the doctrine and what it means to be a believer and how that's compatible and what happens when Sharia is really a political system beyond even just a coda for a religious system. But if one were to go into a bookstore today, and I did it, I was up here in D.C., and of course I live in southeastern North Carolina. I do that by choice. The values are great, the barbecue's great, it's where I raise my children. I see again a Marine smiling, you make me happy. Do I have to slow down though? I've been a Marine twice, I can say that. Friends, I went to the bookstore with a curiosity. How would Islam, and specifically, how would the threat from radicals and from jihad be presented? Here we are in the nation's capital. I wanted to see what was available to students. We've got wonderful graduate schools. We've got wonderful undergraduate schools. And I was surprised. I went to a bookstore up on Connecticut Avenue, and the most forceful presentation of the facts of Islam, specifically the radicalization and the encroachment of Sharia and jihad in the United States, was in fact an apologist book called Islamophobia, the challenge of pluralism in the 21st century. And I mention this because I went looking for something to speak to the threat, and what I found was basically a mirror with a sticky finger saying, you're the threat, buddy, because you're Islamophobic. Well, wait a second, friends. I had to take a step back. See, because I'm not. And I know a lot of people in this room feel the same way. But friends, I fought 2 wars to liberate Muslims from other Muslims. So don't tell me I'm Islamophobic, and don't tell me that I'm a racist, please. I'm just a student of history, and I want to understand something. You see, when I pick up the back of this, and I see the books written by John Esposito, who's a professor of religion and international affairs at Georgetown University, and the founding director of, drumroll, the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Center for Muslim and Christian Understanding. I said, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting credential. And then I noticed that the next gentleman is also a fellow at the Prince Alwaleed bin Talal Center for Muslim and Christian Understanding. And then it kind of resonates to me that, wait a second, isn't that the same prince that tried to give $10 million back in, right after 9/11 when the ruins were still smoldering? And I guess I ought to mention that Pamela and I have become such good friends because I've had the opportunity to speak in a couple of events with her as she's gone out to champion the fact that, of course, building a mosque at Ground Zero is a desecration of an American holy site and an American national battlefield. But it struck me that that was the same sheikh that had tried to give Rudy Giuliani $10 million, of course, with the strings attached that really, I mean, Mayor, I mean, this you have to kind of admit it's Israel's fault, right? And of course the mayor said, no, it's not, keep your money. But that's a little bit of the mindset. Well, wait a second, this is more complicated because that same sheet is given $20 million to the very graduate program in which these men as fellows are ultimately probably collecting a check. But more to the point, and I don't want to impugn their individual integrity because I don't know them, what I do want to do is mention this. $20 million buys a lot of interns and a lot of research time. So in essence, what's being sold in a private bookstore available to the mass market is propaganda that's coming out of Saudi Arabia. And this is what represented Islam. Well, as a Christian, I wanted to see, what did they have there, just out of curiosity. I mean, we're in Washington, D.C. This is the crossroads of the world, the nation's capital. And I was struck by what I found. So again, I wanted to see if they had anything on Sharia, the threat of the imposition of it, and what that means to the American judicial system. I was just curious. And the best that they could offer me was a book on Islamophobia. Again, implying that I was wrong for even seeking that out. They had all kinds of other flowery books that talked about wonderful, peaceful coexistence. Maybe I was in the mythology section. But this is what I found. This is what I found in the Christian book section. Laying Down the Sword. Why we can't ignore the Bible's violent verses. So there was nothing that spoke to the consequence of the imposition of Sharia, as we've seen this now for over 1,000 years. But they had no shortage, and I don't want to overstate the case, but the fact of the matter is what they did have was a specific attack on Christianity. And of course, in picking this book up, and I was compelled to do so, this is of course naturally outlining predominantly the Old Testament, not even speaking to the New Testament. And why does that matter? Because when Muslims try and say, hey, you folks, you're radicals when you quote from the Quran, because there's so much more to it, or you're being selective. Friends, we know that the Old Testament in so many ways was God giving us the laws, which was the precursor to give us the New Testament, which in so many ways was going to provide us the God of laws. This is a sequential process for believers, and yet Muslims are offended when you mention that there's violence in the Quran because they want to point to a part that's less violent. And they don't talk, of course, about the fact that there was a time when Muhammad spent as a man of peace in Mecca, and the transition to a man of politics and war in Medina. They don't talk about the fact that as we move deeper into the Quran, the tones change, the violence change. They don't talk about the fact that, for example, only 14% of this book actually talks about Islam. That only 14% of this book is the tenets, the founding tenets of Islam. 64% of this book is focused on what to do to unbelievers, to kafir, to K-A-F-I-R, which in the West, we've managed to sugarcoat and just say, well, that's somebody that's not a believer. But in fact, this is a terrible, terrible name, a terrible, terrible suggestion, because the true translation is somebody that's a concealer of Islam. And of course, that opens up a whole host of things that you can do to them, and it's perfectly legitimate. Friends, we're going to have more of a conversation about that with our expert panel. I know that Mr. Spencer would probably give us the statistics on what's happened even just in the last 24 hours, how many people have been killed in how many parts of the country and the world. I want to point you at another book, if you don't know it, if you're not familiar with it. It's Sharia Law for Non-Muslims, from the Center of the Study of Political Islam. Their website is politicalislam.com. I recommend it to you as you are building your own bookcase so that you can look to the root of some of this. I'm going to tie this up with a reference to a book by David Barton called Wall Builders. And I'm going to talk now for a little bit about why this is important. Wall Builders, and more importantly, this book, Original Intent, and it's part of the Wall Builders series, and you can go to wallbuilders.com to learn more. David Barton has been on a mission to try and reveal some of the truth of the origins of this country. Why is the truth of our origins so important? Because as we talk about reconciling different political systems today, we have to be honest, A, about who we are, and B, about where we've come from. Because only if we're dealing squarely with those terms can we have any reasonable sense of understanding where we're going to go. But we've seen the left, and you've heard me say this before, in fact, at CPAC, consistently trying to manipulate the terms of the argument and to refresh it. So even today, as this Justice Department seeks to selectively prosecute or selectively enforce the efforts or the issues that are important to satisfy a special interest agenda that pumps tens of millions of dollars into campaign coffers. We see them even just recently, in a case in Chicago, go after the Attorney General decided to sue the public school system because a school teacher had petitioned and wanted to be able to take 3 weeks off to do a Hajj. And of course, this would have been unpaid leave. But the idea that the Justice Department isn't securing our borders, the Justice Department isn't, in fact, enforcing laws that would have pertained to the preservation of marriage, the Justice Department is not concerned with protecting any of the laws already on the books vis-a-vis laws as they related. I have a friend here that works in the nuclear industry, laws that related to Yucca Mountain that might have helped our energy independence, or even the proviso of private sector business being sacrosanct that the government didn't need to come in and kill XL the way they did. Instead of that, we're seeing selective enforcement in an effort to undermine or grind down some of the Christian institutions and potentially bolster and pave a way for what increasingly is more Sharia-compliant legislation, policy, fiscal policy, Sharia finance, and I'm going to turn it over to the rest of our speakers to give us the introduction and the full explanation of what all of those things are. So, panel, I want to say thank you so much for having me and for allowing me to join you this morning. And I hope that I got you all fired up and ready to get into this fight and to listen to the rest of our speakers. Thank you so much for having me.
There's a certain kind of cognitive dissonance in the conference this weekend because CPAC will tell you that there's nothing wrong with Sharia and nobody should be worried about it. And then we have this panel here. And so which is it? And how are we going to know whether this is a real concern or not? I have here the paper panel I held up earlier that was given out at the Suhail Khan event earlier. And of course I don't know what I'm talking about, so don't listen to me. Listen to the paper. The paper says that the Fiqh Council of North America, which is the foremost Islamic legal body in the United States, made a ruling in September 2011 that there is no inherent conflict between the normative values of Islam and the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, it also says, while clearly some Muslims do view Sharia as a hegemonic political force, the vast majority of Muslims, especially those living in the West, view Sharia no differently from the way Jews view, etc., etc. You get the idea. That it's just this perfectly reasonable, benign thing. It's just like Jewish law, just like Catholic canon law, whatever. And so this is essentially the position of CPAC, except that we were able to sneak in. And I wanted to call your attention to that statement. Clearly some Muslims do view Sharia as a hegemonic political force, but that's obviously a tiny minority of extremists who are misunderstanding Islam. The first misunderstander of Islam was Muhammad, the prophet, who said Islam must dominate and not be dominated. Islam must dominate and not be dominated. And he established in Medina the first Islamic political system in which the unbelievers lived in a state of subservience. He first made an agreement with them and then violated the agreements in various ways, massacred, exiled the Jewish communities in the area, and instituted a system whereby, as mandated in the Quran, non-Muslims would feel themselves subdued. Now, in Islamic law, that is an absolutely fundamental aspect of the Muslim's relation with non-Muslims, that the non-Muslim is not equal to the Muslim, because the non-Muslim is a renegade who's rejected the true prophet, rejected the true faith, and has to be made to suffer in this world as well as in the next, to remind him always of how he has evilly gone to war against God. And it's the Muslim's responsibility to make sure that though non-Muslims are subjugated and are subservient, in other words, that Allah's punishment because of their rejection of him is being carried out. That's a fundamental, cardinal aspect of Sharia. Now, Suhail Khan would say, that's not Sharia at all. That's just a misunderstanding of Sharia, purveyed by people who don't know what they're talking about. So, let's look at the record. There have been plenty of Sharia states. There were the great Islamic empires of the Middle Ages. There were the caliphates. There were the sultanates. There are today Saudi Arabia and Iran, Sudan, some areas of Somalia, where Sharia is in place. Now, when we look at those records, when we look at the historical record of those Sharia states of the past, and we look at the present human rights record of Saudi Arabia and Iran, do we find that there is no inherent conflict between the normative values of Islam and the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights? Do we find that the vast majority of Muslims do not view Sharia any differently from how Jews view Jewish law? Don't listen to me, look at the record. In every Sharia state that has ever existed on this planet from the beginning of Islam until now, there have been restrictions on the freedom of conscience, restrictions on the freedom of speech, absolutely institutionalized denial of the equality of rights of women, denial of the equality of rights of non-Muslims, so that they feel themselves subdued in accordance with the mandate of God, of Allah. And that has always been Sharia. And so now we have, at CPAC, at the Conservative Political Action Conference, not just in Mother Jones, and they're here today, hi guys, but in a place you would think would have some sense. You have people saying that Sharia is something that it has never been, and is not now, and does not exist in any Islamic legal book anywhere in the world. And yet people will tell you in the media, oh, Sharia is nothing like that. Sharia is perfectly benign and it's compatible with the Constitution. And we have this in the Washington Post and the New York Times and at the Conservative Political Action Conference. Now, the reality is that we can see obviously what Sharia is. You don't have to listen to me. Just look at where Sharia has always been. Look at what the Islamic legal manuals actually say about Sharia. Read The Reliance of the Traveler, read Minhaj al-Muslim, and look at what they say. What we have now is a concerted effort to assert elements of Sharia in the workplace, in schools, everywhere in America, and to assert the principle that where Islamic law and American law conflict, it is American law that has to give way. And what's the upshot of that? That Muslims get special privileges to which non-Muslims are not privy. Like, the whole assembly line, the whole factory thing has to stop so that the Muslims can pray. And then the meatpacking plants, the J.B. Swift meatpacking plants in Nebraska and Colorado, Muslims get special break times that the non-Muslims don't have. And people say, well, this is human rights and equal treatment. Well, actually, also, coincidentally, it establishes Muslims with rights and privileges that the non-Muslims don't have. The non-Muslims are subdued, and the Muslims reign supreme. Isn't that a funny coincidence? Anyway, Robert Muise is a lawyer with the newly established American Freedom Law Center, which is a very important strike back at the Sharia initiative in the United States, because it is the first law center in the first place that is headed by a Jew and a Christian, so two of the foremost lawyers in the country, David Yerushalmi and Robert Muise. And it is so important and so crucial that Jews and Christians come together as fellow communities who would be subjugated under Islamic law and fight back for freedom. And secondly, because Yerushalmi and Muise have been absolutely at the forefront of some of the most important legal cases that involve the assertion of principles of Sharia in the United States. So it gives me great pleasure to bring you Robert Muise, who will tell you more about what's happening.
Thank you for that kind introduction. As he indicated, I'm co-founder of the American Freedom Law Center with my colleague David Yerushalmi. He's an Orthodox Jew. I'm an Orthodox Catholic, so we describe ourselves as the nation's first authentic Judeo-Christian law firm. And a little bit about my background. I was active duty in the Marine Corps for 13 years. I was an infantry officer in the first Persian Gulf War. My dad raised me right. He was a Marine in the Korean War, and my two other brothers were Marines as well. And when I started this law practice, I've been doing constitutional law for the last 12 years. David Yerushalmi and I have been working together for 4 years on very important cases, and this past January we decided to launch the American Freedom Law Center. When I took an oath as an officer in the Marine Corps, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I slowly started to realize that some of the worst enemies we have are domestic enemies to our Constitution, and those battles were being fought in the courtroom. I never in my life had a desire to be a lawyer. Couldn't stand lawyers. I was an infantry officer, I was a trigger puller. And I saw what was going on, and I said, I came home one day, I told my wife, I'm leaving the Marine Corps, I want to get a law degree, I'm going to go fight this, change my uniform, and go fight for the Constitution. And that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years, and I've been blessed by the Constitution. This is very personal and important to me as well, because my wife and I, we've been blessed with 12 children. And as I say, they're all boys except for 10. First 9 were girls, number 10 was a boy. After the 9 girls, everybody said, you're just having children to have a boy, right? Yeah, I have 9 kids and I want to have a boy. Number 10 was a boy, and then when number 11 came was a girl, and number 12 they stopped asking me questions and they realized that I'm an Orthodox Catholic. The motto in my home is, blessed are you among women. So, what I'm going to talk about, I've got a PowerPoint, because some of the things I have to, I mean, you have to see some of these pictures. I've got a 4-minute video that I'm going to show you. That you have to see what's going on. People can talk about, well, there's none of this pernicious influence of Islam or Sharia, and it's not really affecting our fundamental rights. I'm going to show you some empirical evidence of how our fundamental rights are being eroded. And it's the topic I'm going to talk about is civilization jihad in the First Amendment. Because that's what I think we're under civilization jihad, whether directly or indirectly. And this quote from, I think, President Reagan sums it up quite a bit. Our freedom is never more than a generation away from extinction. And we have to continue to fight for those freedoms. We can't just rest on our laurels, rest on our past. We have to fight for these freedoms for our generation and for the next generation. We don't want to be the generation where those freedoms became extinct. And as a father of 12, I tell you, I'm fighting this fight every single day to ensure that those freedoms are there for my children. And I want them there for your children as well, because this is a great nation, despite what some people will tell you. It is an exceptional nation. It's a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And that's what I'm fighting for. And here's some of the cases I just want to run through. Act 17 versus City of Dearborn. Some of you may have seen this case. This was involved, there was these Christian missionaries. In 2010, they went to the Arab Festival in the city of Dearborn, Michigan, about 40 miles from where I live. I live in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan area. The city of Dearborn happens to be one of the cities with the largest Muslim population. These 4 Christian missionaries went peacefully to the Arab Festival to preach the gospel to the Muslims. Just to give you a background of who these 4 Christian missionaries were, Nabil Qureshi, who has his medical degree, David Wood, who's a professor of philosophy at Fordham University, Paul Rez-Kala, who at 19 years old is a junior at NYU, and Nagin Mayel, who is a young college student down in Texas. Nagin Mayel and Nabil Qureshi are converts from Islam to Christianity. They will tell you emphatically the most important decision they ever made in their life was to become a Christian, and they wanted to share that good news with other Muslims, so they went to the Arab Festival to do so peacefully. Well, they went in peace, and they left in handcuffs, literally. They spent a night in jail for allegedly preaching the peace. Fortunately for these Christian missionaries, they had video cameras with them, and they captured every minute at the festival video. It's 4 minutes long, but it's worth watching. Nabil Qureshi in the red shirt.
I have no problem with Muslims.
Why are you making all those videos look bad? Why are you trying to make us look bad?
I'm not trying to make you guys look bad. When we made the video last year, when we made the video last year, we made it explicitly clear that it was the security we had an issue with. Not everyone at the festival, it's security. Then we put up a video afterwards saying, we want to make this perfectly clear. We don't have any issue with the people there. We have no issue with the people at booths. We only have issue with the people at security. So I got no issue with you guys.
No, but you didn't say that in the video. I was just saying, Islamic people in the community are just all bad.
My mom is Muslim. My dad is Muslim. My sister is Muslim. All my cousins are Muslim. I love Muslims. I got no problem with the Muslim community. It was the security guards here that made the video.
So you came here looking for trouble with the security guards?
Why you decide making all these videos?
That's a good question. We came here last year, and we saw a pamphlet that we had a question about. So we went to the booth who gave us the pamphlet, and we said, hey, can we ask you a question about this? And they said yeah. They said yeah. You can ask a question.
I didn't see you at like the Spirit Festival.
So why are you here another year in a row?
I just happened to be here last year.
And
It
last
was
year
my
was
first time
bad.
here.
Why are you here? Why
We
are
want
you
to see if
here
it's going better this year. We want to see if it's better this year than it was last
Are
year.
you sure about that?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's the other way. I think you're looking for more trouble.
We're not looking for trouble. We want to see things are better. And generally, things have been better. Security hasn't been hitting us. Security hasn't been assaulting us. So things are better. I'm glad about that. And we're talking right now, and no one's stopping us from talking. So I'm glad about these things. This is the very reason I'm here, to make sure you and I can talk.
So you're here to preach?
I would like to preach. We haven't even gotten to that point
So
yet.
preach to me then.
Preach to you? I would love to preach to
Why
you.
is Christianity better than Islam?
Because Jesus Christ did not claim to be just a prophet. He said he was here to receive worship. He did receive worship. He forgave people's sins. He miraculously healed people. He died on the cross and rose from the dead. These truths have changed my life, have absolutely changed my life. And I find it so important to let people know about these things that I will tell anyone and everyone who will listen. So I'm glad you asked the question.
Why isn't like that either?
Why is there more than one Bible?
Why isn't Allah? Why makes Jesus better than Allah?
Who? Okay, I got a bunch of you guys who are asking questions. So did like 4 of these guys. I want to.
A man, a human?
When was
So-
Jesus decided God?
What?
When was Jesus decided as a God?
That's an excellent question.
325 years after the Roman consul declared him as
No,
God.
people are worshiping Jesus as God less than a decade after his death.
That's not. How could
Jesus be a God if he came like any of us came out of a woman? He came like any other man comes out of a woman.
Yeah. So in the Old Testament, we see a prophecy saying that a child will be born to you and he will be the mighty God. So in the Old Testament, it actually says the mighty God will be born as a child to you. And in actuality, it can't just be like a half God. It actually says the everlasting Father, AFDI, will be born to you. So this is a prophecy we knew would happen.
How does God die? You said after his death he was be God.
That's an excellent question. What we find in the New Testament is that in order for God to take our sins away from us, he can't just wave them away. If God were just to wave away sins, he wouldn't be a just God. So he takes our sins upon himself. He says, all right, I can't just wave these sins away. That wouldn't make me a just God. I'm going to pay those sins for you. That's how much he loves us. And so he comes into the world as a man, and he takes our sins for us. He does it all voluntarily. He doesn't have to do any of this.
Have you met Jesus yourself?
Say again? These are great questions, guys. I'm loving this. Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
Where in the Bible says? Can you find the Bible where it says when Jesus says, "I am God, worship me"?
Well, in the Bible, when people...
I'll give you $100 in any Bible. There's 80 of them. If you find me,
Okay,
there's 80 Bibles, but there's only one.
let me...
They change it.
Okay. Are you legally allowed to take this mic?
Go with the mic.
Are you legally allowed to take this?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
He's being handcuffed right now and taken to jail.
Are those police or private security?
Those are police, Dearborn City police officers. They spent the night in jail. That was the video I showed to the jury during the closing argument in their criminal trial. And what I said to them, and I say to you, did what you just watched there happen on a city street in the United States of America? And the answer is yes. These guys were charged for breach of the peace for that. And just, by the way, the microphone that he had wasn't amplifying sound, it was just to pick up the sound for the camera. So this was a street conversation. They were arrested and they were put in jail. We had a week-long jury trial, and thankfully the jury, made up of citizens of Dearborn, acquitted them. David Yershami and I filed a 96-page civil rights lawsuit against the city of Dearborn, the mayor, the chief of police, 17 police officers, and 2 festival workers. The city moved to dismiss the lawsuit, and just last week, our federal judge, we got a really good federal judge, denied every one of their motions, and the case is going to proceed.
Yeah.
This stuff can't happen on the city streets of the United States. Next case I want to talk to you about. Gunny Jesse Nieto, who actually happens to be in the audience today. He surprised me when I saw him sitting out there, Gunny. This case really bothered me. Gunny Nieto was a retired Marine, over 20 years in the Marine Corps. 2 combat tours in Vietnam. When he retired from the Marine Corps, he went and became a civilian employee aboard Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, a place where I was stationed twice. And his youngest son was a sailor aboard the USS Cole. he didn't make it out. His son was one of the sailors that was killed in that terrorist attack. So you had a grieving father who not only changed his North Carolina license plate officially so it says USS Cole, he made his vehicle literally a monument to a mourning father. We died, they rejoiced. Remember the Cole. No quarter for Islamic terrorists. He had those vehicles, those decals on his vehicle that he brought aboard base where he worked, where he was permitted to go as a retired Marine, because you have the benefit to go to the commissary, the exchange, and use the medical facilities and so forth. Obviously, he has a dad who was very much affected by Islamic terrorists. And a complaint had gone up to the base, and the base commander told him, you have an option. You had to scrape off all those decals. He had the gold star there as well for a grieving parent of losing somebody in combat. Scrape off those decals, or scrape off your base decal that allows you to take that vehicle on board. And he said, sir, I'm not going to remove those decals. To issue an order to him to ban that vehicle from any government installation, which included Arlington National Cemetery, where there's a marker for his son, and Norfolk Naval Base, where the Cole Memorial was. So he contacted us. I believe Robert Spencer actually brought the case to me, and we sued the base in federal court in North Carolina, and the judge ruled in our favor. And he struck down the restriction. Constitutional, and the guy, as soon as I called, I tell you, that was one of my happiest calls when I called him, and I could tell that he was choked up on the other side. I said, you get that vehicle, go right back on base, get your base decal, and so we did. And there he is standing outside of the cabin door. And amazing, I mean, we're fighting terrorists, we're at wars, and here it is at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune. It was just absolutely remarkable. AFDI, American Freedom Defense Initiative. Pam Geller is one of my favorite clients. We representing her all over the place. And I didn't put the slide up here for this one, but you may or may not know she was recently sued by a Muslim for her blogging on the Rivka Berry case. She was sued a $10 million defamation lawsuit against her, filed in Ohio for comments she put on her blog covering the Rivka Berry case. The one who sued her was the attorney who was representing Rivka Berry's parents. David Yerushalmi and I represented her in that lawsuit as well, and we got it dismissed. This battle is real. It's not made up. It's not, mysterious or something that's just theoretical. It's happened. Here, AFDI versus SMART. SMART is the acronym for the bus company, the government organization. It stands for the Suburban Mobility Authority for Regional Transportation out of Detroit. Pam wanted to run this advertisement on the buses in Detroit. It's a public forum. They take advertisements from different political organizations, and they denied it. They wouldn't tell us why. They just denied it. Said, no, you're not going to put this up. I have a suspicion those buses run through Dearborn and some of these other communities, and they don't like this political speech, this religious freedom message that she's conveying. However, the bus company allowed this one. Don't believe in God, you're not alone. So if the government says it's perfectly fine, this isn't offensive to anybody, that anybody who's a Christian or anybody who's a believer. I mean, this is just, look at the Detroit Center for Reason. They can put up their advertisement, but none of this, Pam Geller advertisement. Well, David Yerushalmi and I sued the SMART, and the federal judge actually granted our preliminary injunction and ordered SMART to run the advertisements. They refused. They still refuse, and the case is on appeal. So we're trying to get this order actually enforced, but we won the first round. I suspect we're going to win the second round as well. AFDI versus MTA. Yeah. And this, here's the, Pam wanted to run a anti-jihad advertisement in response to an advertisement that was run by this pro-Palestine, anti-Israel organization who put up an ad about getting all military aid out of Israel and blaming, the military, the U.S.'s involvement in Israel with all the problems in the Israeli military. So Pam said, well, I want to run this advertisement. Her anti-jihad advertisement. And what did the MTA say? That's demeaning speech. We don't allow demeaning speech. Apparently it's demeaning to violent jihadists to call them savages. So we sued the MTA, and we just recently filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, and we're going to have hearings on that coming up shortly, and I hopefully suspect we're going to prevail in that case as well. I could go on and on and on with the number of cases. It's very plain when I see somebody who wants to say something truthful but critical of Islam, or somebody who wants to preach the gospel to Muslims. There is a double standard in a way that our constitutional rights are being eroded, dramatically eroded. I didn't make up that video of those Christians being arrested. You can't even, when I tell people that story, that couldn't have happened. You saw the video. It happened. That's all they did, is what you saw in that video, and they had to go through a week-long criminal trial. If we don't fight for these freedoms, we're going to lose them. It's as simple as that. And it's very important what Pam's doing, what Robert's doing. It's from my perspective. I'm a lawyer, and I love doing these cases. I love to be in the fight for them. But if it isn't for people like Pam and Robert who are willing to speak, we wouldn't have these cases to begin with. And we know that when you do speak, you're going to get hit with these defamation lawsuits. But that's why David and I started the American Freedom Law Center. We're a nonprofit. We don't charge our clients for the cases. And we want to defend, not only defend against those bogus defamation claims, but also go on the offensive and take it to them. We challenge the AIG bill. Probably most of you people here don't realize that you're the owner of AIG. We have somewhere 92% shareholders is the taxpayers. We've given over $80 billion to AIG, who, well, by the way, happens to be the world leader in Sharia-compliant financing, which has to comply with Sharia, where some of the profits from that goes on to zakat, which is the religious tax that goes to fund pro-Islamic organizations, jihadist organizations. We went about and we showed in the litigation that at least $153 million, in fact we had a billion, but the judge would at least accredit us that $153 million of taxpayer money was going to these Sharia-compliant businesses supporting those activities, in which you have to have this special Sharia advisory board to advise on theological propositions. In fact, it's very interesting, when we asked the Department of Justice, who was defending the AIG, the AIG bailout, about the questions about Sharia and Sharia-compliant financing and all the activities, they said, oh, we can't answer those. Those are asking for theological propositions. So they admitted in their request for admissions that this was a theological proposition, that your taxpayer money was going to defend. The judge, in the first round, ruled in our favor, and then for some reason, we still can't figure it out, but we're on appeal, he ruled against us the summary judgment motion. But what he had said, the two reasons was, number one, he said there's no indication that the Sharia-compliant financing involves any proselytizing, which we had plenty of evidence to show that, which was not rebutted by the government. And number two, he said, well, you figure $80 billion and only $153 million went to that, that's rather de minimis, so we don't see that as a constitutional violation. This is what our federal judge said. I'm going to be arguing that case before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit on April 20th. If we don't practice these freedoms, we're going to lose them. If we don't fight for those freedoms, we're going to lose them. We have to protect those freedoms. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Robert. Donate your dollars wisely. American Law Freedom Center is represented me pro bono. We're talking $300,000 to $400,000 to fend off that $10 million lawsuit. Donate to them. Also, donate to SIA and AFDI, because I do run those ads, and they cost. And in Manhattan, after I ran the Ground Zero Mosque ads, I used to buy the minimum number of buses, like 5 buses. So of course now, if I want to buy a bus, it's a minimum buy of $58K to buy the size of buses. This is what they do. And I'm going to tell you right now, we got another lawsuit coming. You don't know about this, brother. But you know, the signs for Sharia going up in Kansas City. Sharia. Got questions? Get answers. You see that ad that I ran? That was their ad. Come to Islam. Got questions? Get answers. I just ran exactly what they did, but I flipped it. So my ads are now in consideration. Theirs is Sharia. Got questions? Get answers. So mine says Sharia. Got fatwa? get answers. Call 1-800-I-LIVE-FREE, okay? And Robin picks up the phone. That's a true story. Again, the Sharia is, you have to understand, the blasphemy laws under the Sharia. Do not insult Islam, do not offend Islam, do not criticize Islam. These are the laws under the Sharia, the blasphemy laws, and that's what you're witnessing. With these ads that are rejected, with a self-enforcing Sharia in the media, the media who will not speak critically of Islam. This is Sharia. So when you say, there's no Sharia, hello, you've become inured to it. It's like a drip, drip, drip. It's happening to you as we speak. And the reason why I'm so thrilled that our keynote speaker is here, J. Christian Adams of the former Department of Justice, is because Muslim Brotherhood organizations in this country are using the Department of Justice as their legal arm. You see, Arario Pantano mentioned the school where the DOJ sued, and the school lost, had to pay $75,000 and legal fees. They sued a county in New Jersey because the correction officer wanted to wear the niqab, and they're like, you know, you gotta wear the uniform. The Department of Justice sued and won. Disney is being sued because she wants to wear the hijab. Now Disney said, look, we're going to put you in the back because we have an image. You know, Disney Snow White, Seven Dwarfs, you know, they want to put Snow White in a burqa. And they're suing. They're suing. Disney's had a dress code since 1957. What could be more American than Disney? Cashiers at Walmart and Target who will not handle meat that's not halal sued, and they won. So this is imposing against Islam on the secular marketplace, and I think it's very important that you understand how the DOJ has been compromised. And J. Christian Adams, I just want to say, is one of America's great unsung heroes. Depending upon who writes the history books, this man is peerless. He is singular. I met J. Christian Adams when I received the Annie Taylor Award for Courage from the David Howard's Freedom Center. We were co-winners. And what you need to understand is, here was a lawyer, senior pay grade, all the perks. You know what working for the government is. We used to raise our children, be a doctor. Now it's like, go into the government. You know, that's where the money's at. And what he saw, he could not fathom. What he saw, he could not sanction. And he left, and he blew the whistle on the Black Panther Party. I'm sure you know that story. They were menacing the voters with billy clubs. And what this is all about is disarming the public. You are being disarmed in this war. You need to understand why all of this is happening. And I would like to bring J. Christian Adams up here. And I cannot tell you how thrilled I am, because just so that you know, I mean, he's scheduled to be with Ed Meeks as we speak. Why that scheduling conflict, I don't know. It is CPAC after all. But he's here to speak with us, and I am enormously grateful.
I think I've stepped into a rally. You should have seen the one I left. It wasn't quite like this. But indeed, I apologize for being late. I was moderating a panel with the former Attorney General of the United States, an incredible, great American that truly was. I'm sorry you couldn't be there, but that's how this worked out today. It was interesting watching that video that we all just saw. Did you pick up the little clues, the sort of gentle advertisement of thuggery when he says, are you just here to start trouble? Of course, no one is ever there to start trouble, but that's how thugs talk. That's how thugs talk. And unfortunately, if there's two things that I'm most interested in talking about these days, it's this growing thug movement that is sort of taking over portions of the law, where force or power makes right and not principle. And so that's one of the things. But it was interesting, the topic was shredding the Constitution. And this great American, Ed Meese, was asked, that was the topic of the panel I moderated, what's going on, how is Obama shredding the Constitution? And I was stunned to hear him talk about the Justice Department. I thought that was my gig. You know, what are you doing taking all my great lines? But he talked about the new Black Panther case. He talked about the Justice Department being unwilling to bring cases to get dead people off the voter rolls. And so there is something amiss, and I think most Americans recognize this. But as Pam said, I was at the Justice Department for 5 years. I was in the voting section, and I enforced federal election laws, and I brought the case against Malik Zulu Shabazz, King Samir Shabazz, who's the other guy, Jerry Jackson, and the New Black Panther Party. That case, I'm sure you've all seen the video by now, where they were standing in front of a polling place in Philadelphia on the day that President Obama was elected. What you might not have seen, and I would always encourage you to see by purchasing a copy of my book, Injustice, is the photo of President, or then Senator Obama, marching with Malik Zulu Shabazz in Selma, Alabama in 2007, in March. He appeared that day with Malik Zulu Shabazz at the same podium, and a fellow at the podium was named Najee Muhammad. Najee Muhammad is the Minister of War of the New Black Panther Party, and he's based in Atlanta. And if you Google the words Training Day, New Black Panther Party, you can watch a video of this man who stood at the podium calling for the murder of DeKalb County police officers with AK-47s as you lie in wait with ski masks over your face. Yes, indeed, this was all at Jubilee weekend, which is the celebration of the voting rights march from Selma to Montgomery. Okay, so I was in the Justice Department. What I'm going to do is talk about some of the things I saw there. Most of these were in my book, so if you read the book and already bought it, you can leave the room now. But otherwise, let me go through it. Somebody already mentioned the Berkeley School District case. Let me tell you a little more details about that. Berkeley School District was an Illinois school district where a math teacher by the name of, and I always mess these up, there's nobody like Robert Spencer to get the names right, or Frank Gaffney. I don't, because this is not my area of expertise. I'm an election lawyer. Safura Khan, I think? Safura Khan. She was a math teacher at Berkeley School District. And she asked off, I do this all the time, she asked off for, it wasn't 3 weeks, by the way, it was actually 19 days, which translated almost 4 weeks of time. She asked off during the final days of the semester when math tests were being given and grading needed to be done. So it wasn't just, in September or August, but it was actually in the worst possible time she could have asked. And so she asked off, and the school district said, "Are you crazy? This is finals. You need to give the test, you need to grade the test and get the grades in." So she did not like the answer that she received, and so she quit. She quit her job as a teacher. In any other sane administration, and I include the Clinton administration among them, I'm a big fan of saying I wish Bill Clinton were the president right now, because it would be an improvement. Okay? And that's the truth. In a sane administration, that would have been the end of Safura Khan's plight. But in this administration, everything is different. In this administration, under the leadership of Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez, a true radical's radical, they brought a lawsuit called United States versus Berkeley School District. Your tax dollars at work. And they alleged that this denial of her right to go on the pilgrimage to Mecca was a violation of her rights as a free exercise of religion under the Civil Rights Act. Okay? 19 days. Like so many defendants who have not read my book, Injustice, they caved. Okay? They thought, oh my gosh, the Justice Department's bringing the case. It must be a good case. It must be a straightforward, down the middle of the road, easy to win case. They don't understand. It's exactly the opposite now. This Justice Department is pushing the frontiers on the weaker cases. They're bringing the weaker cases, and states are picking up on it. I'm working as hard as I can to alert states like Arizona, South Carolina, South Carolina just filed an action against Eric Holder to get the voter ID approved. States everywhere are figuring it out. Florida did the same thing. Mississippi's going to go to court on their voter ID. The Justice Department officials, maybe they don't realize, but their gig is up, and it's finally gotten through. Okay, so they bring this case. What does Michael Mukasey say about this case? How rare is it to have a former Attorney General opine about the actions of a successor? Here's what Michael Mukasey says about the Berkeley School District case. Quote, it exhibited very dubious legal judgment. It was a real legal reach, okay? 19 days was unprecedented. And you know, you will have every left-wing blog talk about how this was just religious liberty, but it was unprecedented. The most before that was 3 or 4 days of accommodation. The most before that a court upheld was 3 or 4 days, and this was a 19-day request. I wrote, here's what Tom Perez says about this, about the case. It was a profoundly personal request by a person of faith, okay? That's how he characterized the 19-day request to go to Mecca. And as I write about in my book, a devout Catholic who is now at the Justice Department should take a copy of the complaint and ask for 19 days off and to go to the Stations of the Cross in Poland, and then go to Rome for the Good Friday and for Easter. And as I say in the book, some religions are more equal than others, obviously, because everybody knows what would happen to that request. Let me move backwards, though, in time to another story. And this one's an interesting one. All these involve, of course, the Justice Department. And again, this is not my area of expertise as much, but I'll tell you a story. The Islamic Society of North America has a conference. And in 2007 or 2008, an email went around asking for Justice Department volunteers to go to the conference to work to man a booth. Okay? Now, I was far afield from this, but there was one particular attorney who was in the voting section, and his name was Joel Ard, right? Joel Ard. He was a Marine, and he wrote an email. He wrote an email. He had reply to all. Nothing good comes out of reply to all.
We're not that smart.
So the email goes out asking for volunteers to the Islamic Society of North American Convention. You know, on government time, you just go out to Chicago and man a booth. So Joel hits reply to all. And he says, "Wait a minute, folks. Isn't this the unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial down in Dallas? Is it a very good idea for the Justice Department to be sending booth sponsorship to the unindicted co-conspirator in another Justice Department case?" So Joel, of course, was like swatting at a hornet's nest, and I just sat back and watched. But my point is, this is not something new. My point is that this sort of thing has been going on for good or ill. I'm just describing to you that this is happening, and this has been happening since the prior administration. So, let's go back to the current administration, because it's much more fun. On May 19th of this past year, on May 19th, it was movie day at the Justice Department, and I've written about this at PJ Media. It was movie day at the Justice Department, where an email went out to everybody: drop your work, drop your obligations, and come on down to the theater at Main Justice RFK building, where they would be showing a screening of what a billion Muslims really think. And this movie, again, not my field of expertise, but I am told that the Investigative Project on Terrorism has ripped this thing apart on a statistical methodology. But the notion to me is, that's most important at least, that this administration is now sponsoring Cinema Day on the taxpayer dime, where you can come and watch movies that many people think are statistically flawed on their polling data of Muslim communities. That simply didn't happen in a prior administration. Frankly, it shouldn't happen in any administration. I don't care if it's find out what a billion Catholics think, find out what a billion Jews think. This is not the sort of thing that taxpayers want to see the government spending their priorities on. Okay, now's when it gets really fun. Who are they hiring? Who is being hired by the Obama administration to replace me after I left at the Justice Department? Well, PJ Media, again, if I don't hawk my book enough, I urge you to go to PJ Media, where I serve as a legal editor, did something amazing. We filed a Freedom of Information Act request on this Justice Department asking for the resumes of all of the attorneys that the Obama administration has hired. Now, if you've read my book, you know that they treat the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act request of conservative organizations much differently than, for example, they treat Ryan Riley, who's sitting here at TPM Upbreaker. He just calls up and they give him the information. He's their friend. So when it comes to conservative media, you have to file a lawsuit in federal court, which is what we did, because they wouldn't turn over the information. So we filed a case, I think it was called OSC Media LLC versus Holder, and they eventually turned over the resumes of 113 new attorneys. And you can read the biographies of every single one of them, which is the name of the series. Every single one of them at PJ Media. It's 113 biographies that we researched after we got the resumes. We did background information, and lo and behold, wouldn't you believe that every single one of them came from a leftist or radical or left-wing or political background. There wasn't a single conservative. There wasn't even a single moderate among this group. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the people that are on these, but I'm going to at least name 2 of them. Okay? I'm going to name 3 of them, excuse me. Let's talk about the people who actually brought the Berkeley School District case that I told you about. One was a woman named Barda Hussein, who spent hundreds of hours helping terrorists at Gitmo pro bono. Now, that's one of the things, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Let's get that straight. You're free if you want to. Now, Andy McCarthy will say that that says a lot about you, but you're free to go do pro bono work for terrorists. But in another generation, that would disqualify you for working at the Justice Department. And what we have seen in these resumes is just the opposite, that it appears to be a qualifier, a key to get in the resume, the job interview door. And there's resume after resume after resume of attorneys who spent their time doing pro bono work for terrorists in Gitmo. Daniel Freeman is another one. He also is in the voting section now. Another attorney on the Berkeley case is Rahima Abdelim. And so it's Barda Hussein, Rahima Abdelim, and here's my favorite one, Aaron Schumann. Aaron Schumann is one of the attorneys at Justice who brought this case, who was instrumental, if you followed the Hosanna Tabor, the 9-0 destructive loss by the Justice Department about 4 weeks ago on religious liberty, where the Justice Department was arguing that churches can't appoint their own ministers. Look into it, folks. It's scary. Not even Justice Kagan agreed with the Justice Department. It was 9-0. Okay. Aaron Schumann came to work on religious liberties at this Justice Department. This will tell you everything you need to know. Guess where he came from before he came to Justice? He worked for the Americans United for Separation Church and State, which, if you know, is one of the most militantly atheist and anti-Catholic organizations in the country. It was formed in 1946 as an anti-Catholic organization. He's now in charge of protecting religious liberty at the DOJ. So it tells you the sort of the priorities. Now, another attorney is, and I'll tell you just one more who worked for Gitmo. Anila, and I can't pronounce this, Gizfia, G-Z-I-F-A, okay? This one really tops the charts. She's now in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. She advocated for the release of a Gitmo detainee named Omar Carter. Okay. Omar Carter, who was charged with murder of multiple people in the Middle East. And I suspect you know far more about this than me by the look on your face.
Probably. If it's Omar Carter, it's one, and it was a U.S. medic. And he was technically a Canadian if it's in Afghanistan.
Omar Carter was charged with the murder of a U.S. medic. And this now Justice Department attorney was his chief advocate while she was at the Children's Law Center. It's a strange combination. But I raise this because you see a pattern. Again, nobody says you aren't allowed to do this sort of thing. And I certainly wouldn't. People have a right to counsel. But the question I'll leave you with is why are so many of them showing up as attorneys at the Eric Holder Justice Department? I will submit to you that is because their work is viewed as a badge of honor. And people will tell you it's perfectly honorable. They won't even mince words about it. The last thing I want to mention is the conflicts problem at DOJ. Many of the senior political people, the highest level people at DOJ, including Tom Corelli, who served as the Associate Attorney General, which is the number 3 at Justice, probably Eric Holder, but it's not clear, had conflicts. When they came to justice, they were conflicted out from working on a wide variety of terrorism cases because they had been working on the other side. Okay, Tom Corelli is one of them, and the department has been very, very tight-fisted about releasing some of this conflict data. And of course, many in the media and others are just, they're dogged and they never let it drop. And that's why you see it all the time. We know exactly how many conflicts Holder and Corelli have. Let me just close on this note, that there was a time, and it wasn't very long ago, that the Justice Department exemplified the best in America. And there is a widespread perception that is not simply held by conservatives, not simply held by Republicans, that this Justice Department is representing the worst in America, and that this Attorney General is not fit to hold the office. And let's just hope that his days in that office are numbered. Thank you very much.
In the struggle, we are all the soldiers. There is nobody else who is going to fight these societal battles for us. This is not a military struggle, although obviously the military dimension of it is connected. It's the same fight. But when we are fighting these cultural societal initiatives, it is up to every one of us. And our next speaker exemplifies a free citizen who has taken it upon himself to fight against the encroachment of Sharia and to defend the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the equality of rights of all people before the law. James Lafferty of the Virginia Anti-Sharia Task Force. And I have to add that James has recently joined the board of our new international organization, a coalition of anti-jihadists in America and Europe and elsewhere, the Stop Islamization of Nations, Stop Islamization of Nations, and James is also a board member of that.
Thank you. In the interest of full disclosure, I am an Irish Catholic Zionist. To add some balance in this room, I'm a veteran of the U.S. Navy. My wife and I were talking the other night, and I said, you know, there's one good thing that all this anti-Sharia stuff has brought to us. We've met a lot of good, interesting people. And I was reminded of that today as I sat up here looking down at this table. It's like being in really good company, like those nights at Monticello when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. I live in the Wahhabi corridor in Northern Virginia. It is Route 7, if any of you are familiar with it. You know, my house is on the patrol list for the Fairfax County Police. And every hour or so they swing by, and if I'm up during the night, I see the searchlights go over our house. My life has been threatened numerous times, as all the people up here have experienced. I always laugh when I get invited to these interfaith meetings, because I'm told, well, we've got to get along, you know, and as our leading candidate for the Republican nomination says, this is a religion of peace. And they tend to treat Islam as if it's a bunch of Unitarians who are having a bad day. It is not that at all. The Carl Ridge Ministries sent a TV crew out to follow me around at one point. And I went to the infamous Dar al-Hijra Mosque, which is, I'm within the 3-mile zone there. My wife and I often wonder why we get headaches a lot. We're in the 3-mile zone of Dar al-Hijra, where all of the terrorist cowards attended, and were part of the congregation there. And I took this film crew with me, and we pull up, and there's a madrasa at this mosque. And all the kids were out in the yard. And we pulled up, and they had a band, so they rolled the door back, and they were shooting film. And all the kids in the playground ran over to the fence. And guess what they yelled? FBI. Now, what schoolyard in America can you go where kids even know what the FBI is? These kids saw it. Part of what I do is the frontline sort of stuff. Many of you here, I see a lot of familiar faces of people who stood in the rain with me at David Ramadan speeches, where Ed Meese was there to endorse him. Let's not forget that. I've been a protest at Dar al-Hijra, a protest in Arlington where the Arlington police hassled us. We've all been in these, and I see many faces here today who participated in those. We need to do more of that. It's cool to know what the Muslim Brotherhood is. It is important that you read Robert's books and that you understand that. But it is equally important that you act on what you know. This week, I lobbied for an anti-Sharia bill in Virginia. I lobbied against the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Virginia Bar Association. I mean, I don't think there are some terrific lawyers in this room, no doubt about it. But none of them were there with the Bar Association. And then the Muslim Society of Virginia and the Adams Mosque in Northern Virginia, which is sort of the propaganda center of the jihad up here. They lobbied against us. I was pretty much it the first day. I was the witness. I was the only one there to talk against it. Other groups, the Tea Party, Act for America, a number of other groups got involved. But we're on the losing side in Virginia right now. We are outnumbered, and we're outnumbered not just by the people that we can recognize as the enemy, we're outnumbered by Republicans who work with them. Yeah, the governor somebody mentioned. Virginia, everyone thinks Virginia is a very conservative state. If this is a conservative state, I'd hate to see what Massachusetts is like. Because we are being outgunned by them, literally and figuratively. And they are good lobbyists, they are organized, and we're just basically missing the boat. So, if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember that I'm asking that act on what you know. Start an organization in your state. State organizations know the ground, they know the people, and they're best suited to fight this. And this is a fight. The fight doesn't stop until we stop fighting, but we've got to start the fight here sometime soon. And I get the feeling for a lot of people that they think that they've met their responsibility when they read one of Robert's books and they think, well, I've done my bit. We do not. There are people, good people in towns throughout America, like in Dearborn, where people have to carry guns to survive. It is serious. And what I guess I'm asking you today is please give this your prayerful thought and look at it. One story, my wife and I, my wife is sitting right here. We joke that among the many good things that President Reagan did for America was introduce us. We were married in '99. I got the year right? And we live in the community there where it is just, they're really, I mean, it's just so bad. And I'd invite any of you who want to go on the terror tour of Northern Virginia. I can show you the Starbucks where they sat and sketched out the Pentagon on a napkin, according to the FBI agents who did the investigation. I can show you 2 houses that were put up as bond for the blind sheikh. It's a center, and it's Northern Virginia. It's a town, it sounds like a Jimmy Stewart sort of town. It's called Bailey's Crossroads. And it is where they laid out the whole thing. My wife and I saw in the paper one night that the Islamic Study Academy, which is a school operated by the Saudi government that teaches Sharia and operates on Sharia, was renewing their lease. The county government leases them property to do this, to teach this stuff. So my wife Andrea and I went and testified against it, and we started out by asking questions, and this made the Board of Supervisors furious. So they immediately attacked us. Said that one supervisor said we had slandered Islam. Under Sharia, you slander Islam, it's all over, you're dead. So I get up there and I said, and I'll tell you who it was at the end, which is going to throw you even more. We think that you should not lease property to these people. They hate Christians, they hate Jews, they just about hate everybody. And we don't think you should do it. And he came back at us and he said to me, you know, Mr. Lafferty, I'll bet, did you know that the Army troops at Fort Belvoir go there for Farsi lessons? And I said, no, I didn't know that. And he says, I'll bet you object to that. And I said, nope. Those are exactly the people who ought to be going to the Islamic Study Academy. They know what to do with people who talk about murdering Jews. They know what to do with people who've been involved in murdering Americans and attempting to kill the president. The guys at Fort Belvoir know how to handle that. And I'm all for them going. Well, he just about gave birth to something. But, you know, virtue like that goes rewarded. He's a U.S. Congressman.
Yeah.
Jerry Connolly from Virginia. Jerry Connolly. Well, the valedictorian at the school was the one, Abu Ali, who plotted to kill President Bush and some members of the Senate. And he's a really bad character. And when they went in, he got 30 years for that. I guess, 30 years for that. And he comes back in, and this judge says, Mr. Abu Ali, you've done terrible things here, and you've got this sentence, and what do you think? And Abu Ali says, I would do it again. As a matter of fact, I'd kill you. And the judge says, oh, wait a minute, let's look at this sentence. And he says, I think I see life sentence here. And he changed it. The judge changed it right on the spot.
That'll be Obama's end-of-term pardon.
But what this gentleman was saying about the Justice Department, I went to the briefing on the Hate Crime Summit. And I went there, and it was all Muslim officials speaking. And remember, this is a Justice Department meeting, got up and really ragged on 2 groups, the FBI and the NYPD. So whatever they're doing something good. And particularly the New York Police Intelligence Unit. So let me just say, this is a spiritual war that we're fighting. It is not a religious war, but it is a spiritual war. We are called by Scripture to be co-workers of the truth. And that's what my wife and I and many others within our group see us doing. Standing up at council meetings, standing up to the government. The government in Fairfax County, Virginia mails out notices for Muslim dinners. for Muslims to recruit Muslims into their mosques at government expense. We stand up against this, and I would ask you, just as I had to do this week where I had to work alone in Richmond for a good part of the week, we need other people, we need other bodies. We need people who will courageously stand up wherever you are, whatever state. I guarantee you there's a problem there. And talk with us. I will plug Pamela's book, Stop Islamization of America. Is the only book you need right now after you've read all the good stuff that these guys do.
It's at the back. You can get one on your way out.
After you've read all the good stuff that these guys can tell you about the Muslim Brotherhood and get an idea of the underpinnings, the theoretical underpinnings of jihad in this country, then you need to act. And Pamela's book tells you how to do that. It tells you how to fight, tells you where to fight, gives you some of the tricks that all of us have learned during this time. And if you take that and only pick out a chapter of it and do it in your community that week, you'll do tremendous good for this country. Thank you. Okay.
Just in closing, we want to take questions. Just understand that it is enormously important your role in this. No one is going to save you. You are going to save you. On September 11, 2001, when Muslim terrorists drove those planes into those buildings, were those doctors and lawyers and stockbrokers and mothers and fathers and sons and daughters wearing uniforms? Were they our soldiers? Are they our fighters? Yeah. Yeah, they are. Yeah, you are. It is incumbent upon you. You cannot go to this conference and say, they're handling it. We're okay. Let's go have dinner. You cannot do that. You must fight this war. You must. You will win this war. You know, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Department of Justice because I had gotten wind of them using the racial paradigm that they use to create legislative districts, to create Muslim majority legislative districts. So I had asked for the very narrow request for the correspondence between them, the DOJ, and the groups named as Muslim Brotherhood operatives in the largest Hamas, I mean Jewish Hamas, the largest Hamas funding trial in our nation's history in Holy Land, the Holy Land Foundation trial in Texas. Do you know, when they finally got back to me, I was told it was such an enormous request that there were over 14,000 documents. Now, mind you, I don't know how many pages each document is. 14,000 documents between the DOJ and Muslim Brotherhood groups like the Council of American Islamic Relations, Islamic Society of North America, Islamic Circle of North America, so on and so on and so on. Now, finally, I got the first batch. I said, okay, send it to me in dumps. Send me the first few hundred. It took a year and a half, okay? And we got the first dump. And I can tell you what's extraordinary in the entire package is the casual relationship, the servile relationship. Oh, we're going to buy lunch for your meeting. How much money would you need? Oh, $1,000 should cover it. I mean, that in itself is not a smoking gun, but the entire package is a smoking gun. Of course, my next Freedom of Information Act request is going to be for the same documents with Jewish groups and Christian groups. And I guarantee you, if I get 4, I get a lot. So I think we should take some questions. Please buy the book, Stop the Islamization of America. It addresses exactly in your community what you're experiencing. We are not against Muslims, okay? We are not against Muslims. I know, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic bigot. Not. We are counter jihad. I don't care if you worship a stone. Just don't stone me with it. That's it. Equal rights for all under the law. Thank you so much for coming. And sitting in your seats, we're going to take questions. You want to say anything? Okay, great. Okay.
We just have a few more minutes, so let's go right to the questions. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, where are we with the Ground Zero mosque?
Oh, thank you. I just want to say one thing. You see, there's proof. Thank you. Brilliant. I owe you a $5. The Ground Zero Mosque is proof that what you say matters. You had a president who came out and supported it, not just supported it, but supported it at the iftar dinner. That was his message at the iftar dinner. You had a mayor, a complicit mayor, who came out by Tom Fitton, the Judicial Watch filed a Freedom of Information Act request. According to emails between Bloomberg's office and the Ground Zero Mosqueteers, the Bloomberg administration was filling out the forms. The Bloomberg administration was writing the letters to the Bloomberg administration on how to frame it. I am saying the media, the end of media, wanted that mosque built. They love that mosque. NBC named the Ground Zero Mosqueteer Sharif Al-Gamal the NBC Person of the Year. Here's a man who had a rap sheet. Here was a man who defaulted on not one but $200,000 bank loans. He didn't pay his taxes. Con Ed is looking to evict him. He doesn't pay his rent. And he's NBC Person of the Year, okay? But we defeated that mosque. You did that. Tens of thousands showed up to the rallies that we held. And without the media, our first rally was June 6th, 10,000 people showed up. Even at ancillary rallies that were held, they got thousands. And on September 11, 2010, we had roughly 30,000 people. You did that. They fear you. They fear you. You have enormous power because the individual can change the course of human events. If we know anything about human history, we know that. Never forget your power. I'm one girl with a blog. Don't ever forget that. That's it.
I want to add one thing about the mosque also. You will hear, you may have already heard, that it's built, it's open. They're having events. The Park 51 Community Center had a big art exhibition not too long ago. And people have started to contact us and say, how do you feel now that the community center that you opposed is now open? Well, this is just more media deception. They're still in that Burlington Coat Factory building that was destroyed on 9/11, or partially destroyed on 9/11. They didn't build their 16-story Victory Mosque. They just declared victory and got out. And the mosque may still be built, but the fact that they did not begin work on it on September 11th, 2011, as they had originally announced, is an indication of the fact that we, the people, have power.
Yes.
Yes,
Mr. Lafferty called us to action. A few months ago, I live in Houston, Texas. A friend of mine and I got together. He's an expert on Sharia. I was just learning Sharia. We put together a slideshow presentation, and it's basically based on the book Sharia Law for Non-Muslims. I'm glad to be able to use your book now, Pamela, for some more information. So is this the type of thing? We actually, unfortunately, we put out 350 invitations right in our neighborhood, which is a conservative Republican neighborhood. We had 3 attendees. Okay, it's a little discouraging, but we're not discouraged. And so we're planning additional seminars on Sharia law for non-Muslims. And I would just like to encourage other people, even if you have limited knowledge, get your knowledge and go out and start having seminars to educate Americans on Sharia law. That's great.
You were successful. Those were 3 people. Those were 3 people that didn't know. And those 3 people know 3 people, and those 3 people know, and that's how it gets started. That's how the Ground Zero Mosque was defeated. There was a blog. I started blogging on it in December of 2009. And the media wouldn't touch it. As a matter of fact, it was lauded on the front page of the New York. Oh, look, isn't this not fabulous? Look what we're doing in New York. Aren't we? All that in a bag of chips. That's how it was. That's how I found out about it. In a laudatory article in the New York Times. That's very important. That's how you start. That's how you start. And you will come under withering criticism, and that means that you're doing something right.
You know something else? Just 1 second. I just remembered that, you know, Pamela mentioned she first blogged on this in December 2009, and that's when I first heard about it. It was a front page story in the New York Times. And just incidentally, to show you how deeply entrenched the Muslim Brotherhood groups are in the United States, and how powerful they are, and how close they are to the mainstream media. That first initial article, which I read on Atlas Shrugs, out of the New York Times, the New York Times quoted the Ground Zero Mosque Imam, Faisal Abdul Rauf, saying that the closeness of this building to the World Trade Center towers is iconic. And this will be a mosque that is inextricably connected to Ground Zero. These are not his exact words, but this was the import. And If you go, and that was right there in the paper and on the online edition, and that's where she got it. But if you go to the archival copy of that story in the New York Times archives today, that sentence is not in there. Because they started to push the story after Pamela started bringing pressure on this. They started to push the idea that this is not a mosque and it's not at ground zero. It has nothing to do with ground zero. It's just coincidental that that's right over there. It's just coincidental that the thing fell through the roof. The landing gear for the planes fell through the ceiling of this building. And that Muslims build triumphal mosques on the sites of jihad victories. That has nothing to do with any of this. And so they had to excise the evidence that this is exactly how these people had been talking right before this.
He actually said that the building, which was partially destroyed in the 9/11 attacks, his words was iconic of Ground Zero. It was iconic, and that's why it was such an important site.
James, sorry to hold you up.
That's okay. Sir, I think what you're doing is great, and that's what most of us should do. I would look for friendly audiences, and those are evangelical churches, conservative evangelical churches that are biblically based. Conservative Catholic groups like Opus Dei, and gun shops.
And don't be afraid to protest. Don't be, you see something wrong, see something, if you see something, protest something.